Welcome back to a new episode of the Family on Three podcast, where we explore the importance of community, the value of authentic leadership, and what it means to be a good teammate. I'm grateful to be joined today by Dr. Jeff Terwin, the current head of school at the Wellington School in Columbus, Ohio. Jeff speaks today about the characteristics of strong communities, the challenges of leading diverse and complex organizations, and the impact that serving others can have in raising the bar for everyone involved. Let's bring it in, huddle up, episode 5, Family on 3 with Dr. Jeff Terwin.
Family on 3, 1, 2, 3, family.
Or you just finished your freshman year, and now what? So you can slice it all kinds of ways. It's an opportunity, but also, pretty terrible for kids that are having to navigate it.
Yeah, and I think it's actually, a perfect segue into technically starting the conversation.
Whenever you want, I'll swear.
Yeah. No, don't worry about that. Excuse me. I think that one of the unique things, and I ran into a colleague of mine on campus at Denison, maybe this past weekend actually, and we were talking 6 feet apart about. I've been so impressed with how the Denison community has communicated and handled the situation. And, she said to me, she's like, this is the perfect moment where you realize just how important it is to have that size and scope that you can manage. She's like, imagine trying to do this at, Ohio State or even Miami of Ohio or OU, and so with the power of community and the ability to have buy-in and trust and all of these pieces, is something I'm a huge believer in. I've always kind of been associated with smaller communities. And, with you, as you've gone through your career, you've been in the Northeast, you've been on the North Shore of Chicago, you've been in the private school world.
Only the finest.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But you did end up in the Midwest.
Correct. It brings you back.
As you look at these experiences, like what are some of the similarities that you see that make a powerful and impactful community, especially in moments like this?
Yeah, I think the piece for me that's common to either the communities I've been connected to or the schools I've been a part of, I think community really gets down to, can those individuals be themselves? Can you represent what you think, what you value, know that there's a place for your voice? And I think for schools, we understand that schools can be really challenging for students, but I think there's too many school environments where kids can't be themselves, where they have to frame who they are, trying to anticipate what they should be, or what's going to get them access to some social, piece. And that's why a place like Wellington or other schools where I've been, where there isn't that one specific, Wellington student looks just like this. A Wellington student has to be open to find their voice and use their voice, but then also be ready to hear others' voices and be challenged and grow by learning from others. So I think that community piece is more defined by your voice matters. You can use your voice, and we want to know what you're about.
Sure.
And I don't know that a lot of schools, though we know they should have that. I don't know that a lot of schools have that for their students.
No, I think you're right on both of those fronts. Obviously, being a Wellington alum, that rings true, to me. But I also think that it rings true in a different way. When I came through Wellington, and anybody that, went through school and anytime really not in the last decade, technology has been a huge piece that's had a factor. You talk about finding a voice. There's pros and cons to that. And, it's in all honesty, I think we're seeing it right now in our culture. But, in your experience, when you look at Wellington specifically, what was it about that community that you kind of put your your finger on and said, like, this is the community I want to lead. It's different to want to be a part of a community. And it's different to want to lead one. And, as an assistant coach, I've looked at a lot of teams and programs that have had opportunities to be a head coach, but there's pieces that you're looking for that are fundamental that you look at and say, okay, like, yes, this is a group, this is a place, these are people that I could see myself leading. What was it about Wellington that kind of that did that for you?
That's a great question. I think the key piece that came across as soon as I started having interviews, and I did have an interest to get back to the Midwest. You got to be in the Midwest. It's so nice. And started to have those conversations focused around that new ideas are valued, that it is a safe place and a place that encourages people to bring ideas. To your point around voice, and obviously there's some voices out there that maybe don't bring the most positive elements out, but the idea that you're bringing a perspective and a background and bring those ideas to the table. Let's see how they might work. You talk about in improv the yes and culture, right? You hear something, it's not exactly where you are, but having that mindset, yes, and we can also do this instead of no but, or yes but. So I think the new ideas being valued, and what also came through is what I like to call a joyful exploration. There's a value given to those small moments of joy, and my philosophy is work really hard, challenge yourself, challenge your students, but this is really hard work, and you have got to be open to find those moments of joy where you can elevate each other. And so being open to that, it's still serious hard work, but man, we've got to have a little fun along the way and help students understand that that's a part of what they need to develop, an ability in any moment to see that you can still find some joy. There's absurdity in education. It's crazy business. Part of the reason I love it is just constant problem solving and trying to put these pieces together. So if you don't take a moment to find the joy, it's going to be some tough sledding. So I think that the new ideas being valued and the joy, those embed to create an environment that was really attractive for me.
I love that. And I think your point about how, because the work is hard, is actually why you need to find the joy. It just is. You just described parenting also. With 3 young kids, 4, 6, and 8. My wife and I joke all the time that, like, you have to find in those moments of insanity the piece that's like, yeah, this is incredible. Like, and it's not easy. I mean, I was lucky enough.
And so apropos to right now, right?
100%.
You're in your house with your kids for a long time. I don't know that any of us had done that at this scale. So what you can either, man, we got to cook dinner again, or let's find the craziest recipe based on these 10 ingredients that we just pulled out of our pantry. Everybody bring an idea. Let's build a thing. It's still about the same amount of time. You still need to eat. But how does that look different than, I got to make another dinner? And that's a mindset shift. That's all it is.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the mindset piece, and it's funny that you bring that up, because early on in this, which feels like, 4 months ago at this point, I was having breakfast, and my oldest, Isla, who's 8 going on like 48, you could just tell something was a little off. And I was asking her, just finally asked, how are you doing with this? And with an 8-year-old, you don't know the response you're going to get. So part of it was also just my curiosity. And, she just started talking about what she missed with, and in that moment, and part of it was the coach in me that was, how do I reframe this, to your point? And, so I just asked her, I said, if I were to tell you that you had to give up this, in perspective, small period of time to do your best to help make sure that Gidge and Poppy and Grandma and Grandpa have the best chance of not getting sick, would you do it? She said, of course. I said, okay, that's what you're doing. And it was in that moment where again, just that idea of reframing it. It wasn't, she wasn't wrong for feeling how she felt. And it reminded me too that the most important question, and this came out of my conversation with a colleague of yours, Craig Jones, earlier on a previous episode, was just asking someone, how are you doing? And letting them talk. And with no judge, as they say, talking to listen and not to respond, but just that idea of how is this impacting you?
And connected with that, and you did this as well, is the why. There's the Simon Sinek talk that, got all the, went viral and everyone saw that, the why matters. But reminding ourselves, and that's the other really attractive thing for me about Wellington, is the why of learning, getting away from that just standardization that because we have to. Why are we doing this? And then because it positions students to be more successful and to develop skills that they need later. Like, if that's not what education should be, then what are we doing? So drilling back to the why, and as we have challenges that we're trying to solve a problem with a parent, and we get at the why are we doing what we're doing? Well, let's acknowledge this is out of love. The parent may have a perspective. I have that. We want the student to be successful. It's we're trying to get it right? We both bring that. Can we agree to that? All right, now we've at least level set there. If we differ in what that looks like, but if I say, what are you worried about? What are you scared of? And they say, well, I'm afraid they're going to end up, in my basement when they leave high school. And then if I can say in a really safe way, well, some of the decisions you're making now are making that more likely. It's not they're not trying to do the wrong thing, but as we're asking parents to give a little more trust for us to give that student some challenge and let them take more ownership. There may be some risks, there may be some failure, and that's where parents get really worried because they're trying to protect their kid, again, out of love. If we can help them understand the why this challenge, why this little failure matters, now we can say, okay. And it's not that the parents want their kid to fail, but once they understand the why of a little bit of failure, and if you take away some of that control from the student, what does that tell them for future challenges? That they're not capable of handling that. So those little tweaks on how the narrative, it's not we're not disagreeing about what we want. We're disagreeing about how to get there. And so that why the tell me more, help me understand what's on your mind. All those things are so critical. And I think schools get away from that because you sometimes feel like you don't have the time for it.
Sure. And one of the words that you brought up in that was trust. And I think that in any type of leadership role, and I think sometimes we forget that as parents, we are in a leadership role. We always kind of associate leadership with business or a position or a title or whatever you want to say. But, I think for all of us now, we are in so many different leadership roles. And, as the son of a teacher, married to a teacher, and worked in schools and interestingly enough, in like every capacity except for as a teacher, the educational world is fascinating to me because I think that it presents such a unique challenge in leadership because let's take a role like yours. You are leading a group of constituents that ranges from 3-year-olds to 60 and 70-year-olds. You are leading a team of staff that ranges from first-year teachers fresh out of college to seasoned professionals. You are being led by a board of trustees that is made up of primarily very successful business leaders in their own right. I think we can all agree that this is certainly unique, but what I think is, what is it about this that is exciting for you? And talk about how you have found your authentic voice across these groups.
Yeah, when you describe it like that, I'm like, what am I doing? What does decisions have I made that I landed? I'm a marine biologist, for goodness sake. Like, what's happening? I I think that the common thread is a deep interest in problem solving, and that interpersonal challenge of trying to figure out what a person wants and needs, to then try and navigate that. Part of what held me up for a while in this is I made the shift from teaching to administration, partly because of the range of constituents you're dealing with, and you framed it really well. Is that I was a pleaser for a long time. Like, I wanted to find that right answer, and everyone's, oh, look, you solved the problem and we're all happy. And what I had to come to grips with, it started as a dean of students, was there are going to be people upset with your decision making.
Yes.
Right. And you've got to get over that. And that's what drives you back to that. Why? Can you articulate why this is the decision you need to make? And then help people understand, yep, let me hear you. You still have concerns, let me hear those, but here's where we're headed. And once you can get into that, there's power in just being able to articulate your decision. Even when people are still upset, they don't agree with you, they're like, fine, but then eventually if you've explained it. So I think I'm driven by, in those moments, to really try and understand what's motivating a person or a problem. And then can I pull the pieces together to help resolve it? I don't seek chaos, but I'm also energized by a little bit of challenge and discord to try and bring that. And I don't know where that comes from, but I think that's also in teaching. I have this, I want to get these students to this place. I want them to feel energized by trying to get to that place, and I want them to be willing to be challenged in that. And so how do you then steer that? I think there's a lot of parallels in working within a classroom, and then also working with the constituents that you talked about to move through there.
Well, I think there's a ton of, there's so much of what you said specific to how you described your work that I think applies across the board. That's not, and it's not specific to being the head of school at a K-12 private school. It's the problem solving piece. I think the piece you spoke to about being okay with others not agreeing with you. I think we are inclined as individuals, for the most part, to fall more in that pleaser. It's just easier to be in a group of people that agree with you than not.
Right, exactly.
But I think that, and even in my time at Wellington, both as, when I was there as a student, it was in this, it was in its infancy, and with, both my parents worked there, and just kind of seeing people that were willing to just keep pushing the ball forward, and a willingness, again, to kind of not blow through the status quo, but challenge it. And I think that skill set has transcended people that have come and gone at the school. And as I followed, the school since you've taken over, I'm a huge believer in authentic leadership, as cliche as that sounds, but you have an incredibly authentic voice, and approach. And I think that's just it's such a cool thing. And right now it's, people like that are built, for moments like this. But as you look back, let's talk about when you're deciding, I'm going to get my PhD back. And that's a commitment. You're in it to win it when you do that. What was it about the path to here? When was that moment that you're like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to pursue.
Yeah, I think the main pivot for me was when I realized the classroom and teaching really lit me up in a way that felt authentic and energizing. I was seeking more work to try and make my classroom better, whereas I was starting to do more marine bio research and having to crunch the data, write the papers, write the grants. That felt like work. We're then prepping for my marine diversity lab. I was shot out of a cannon, I couldn't get more resources, and then I want to build a thing and then watch how the students reacted to it. And so I stepped back and went to my PhD advisor, who was a old school, hardcore, basic science, basic research person. I said, I think I want to teach. And he's like, that'll wear off. You'll get over it. Like, you need to be out doing this other work. And I had to push through some raised eyebrows and some side eyes from my research colleagues to say that's not the highest level. There's the joke, those who can do and those who can't teach. And it's just not applicable, because when you discover that you do want to teach, the power and then an impact that you have on all those students that are going forward, we talk about it being the most powerful job, because you can tweak and steer or just open a student's eyes to what they can do. And that light bulb moment, all that stuff does feel a little cliche. But once I had that, then I said, okay, I am confident that's the space I need to be in. What I didn't anticipate, I thought I'd do the teaching, I was still doing summer research. The admin stuff is I would have never, and my college buddies still are like, wait, what are you doing for a job? And I think that's where I started to get involved in student council or the environmental club. And that's where the independent school model of all these co-curricular elements and traveling with students and really getting to know their story and their strengths and weaknesses and their worries, and being able to then pivot to push them in a really optimistic, positive way. That's where I saw so much beyond the classroom. There was so much value there. I was coaching more. And so that's where the pieces came together. And that was a natural thing. I didn't plan to be ahead of school. That was not ever, I've never had an interview other than one when I talked about being ahead of school. Of doing that, I wanted to sort of take that next step. I thought a division head was a really interesting job. It was a really challenging job. But it's just been that path, and trying to explain to the students that's what they can be open to and should be open to, is their path is going to be circuitous. And they need to find those moments that really energize them, where they want to engage more and do more work. And that's part of what our model tries to do with deep dives, and allows them to do that. And that's been my path. And now I'm a head of school in Columbus, Ohio. You would have never predicted that 20 years ago.
As a marine biologist, no.
Fold that in. I got my blue crab hat on.
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
A marine biologist, and the marine biology is identifying problems, collecting information to be able to solve that problem, be able to articulate the findings, and then set a course. And the PhD is partly just a battle of attrition. Are you willing to just gut it out? I had some meetings, some of the defense meetings are, everyone in that room is trying to find the things you don't know. So as soon as you start talking about something they cut you off. So what about this? And it's just this constant thing. And you finally have to say, that I actually don't know. And the strength to finally say, I don't know that answer, but here's how I figure it out. Like, that's the moment where you go, okay, now I can solve problems. Because until you can admit that, you're kind of flying blind.
Well, isn't that true with so much? Until you can admit that you don't know it,
yeah.
You have zero hope of ever knowing it. No, I think I love that. I love the reason I even started this podcast, having these conversations. I love learning how people got to where they are, because very rarely is it this straight line. Like, when I was 18 years old, I knew I wanted to be the head of school at a private school. Like, it's just not how it works. But one thing you talked about in there with the students, you used the word optimism, which is actually the perfect way to pivot to my next question for you. Recently, Wellington has embraced this mantra of unflappable optimism. I saw it for the first time, I think, a couple of weeks ago. Like I said, time is off, so it could have been a couple of months ago now. But I saw it on Instagram. I saw it on a post with Wellington. It was just the words. And there was something about the phrase that just, like, it made me smile and almost chuckle, just because for whatever reason, it like brought some energy when I read it. And, as an alum, I think it's a perfect way to describe the underlying personality of Wellington.
Yep, definitely.
But at the same time, it gives this hope and encouragement that is so fitting for right now. When you hear that phrase said back to you, what what thoughts or feelings come to mind for you based not only on the current climate, but also just based on your years as an educator and what that means in the education process for young people?
Yeah, I think what it comes down to, and I love it too, and part of the reason we love having kids is they, mock us for our silly, my dad jokes or whatever, but we got a new puppy and we were trying to think of a name for the puppy. And my son, who had watched the Wellington, my addresses to the family in Wellington, he goes, "Hey, how about unflappable?" Thanks. So we have built that out, and it's built on this getting information about the values at Wellington, what really matters. And your point about how the school started and where it came through is an unflappable optimism comes through. For me, I think at its core, what it gets at is, for students especially, but adults just as much, we give way too much credit to the influence of the environment and our circumstances on how we feel about what's going on and how we feel about our ability to move forward through that. And the research shows that's a part of it, but your circumstances actually is a small part of that. The control that you actually have to see a situation and then elevate what you think is possible is up to you. And so for students to understand, and we talk about, in college, you're going to run into that. We'd never say at Wellington, but in college, you're going to run into that professor who just doesn't connect, right? Like it's they're unfair and they have their favorites and all these things. Well, guess what? You still have to get through that class.
100%.
You have to decouple yourself from that unfairness and figure out, what can I do to control this to have the most optimistic, positive outcome? Because that matters to me. You're going to move on. What happened to you is not as important as that professor. You have to live with that outcome. So in any of these circumstances, we talked about the dinner thing before, like in this moment, you have control to pivot to be a much more energizing, optimistic, opportunity-based mindset. And that unflappable optimism permeates that. It doesn't mean we have to celebrate when terrible things happen. You can still take a moment to acknowledge this pandemic is terrible on so many levels, and families are hit in so many ways that are awful. And we want to have empathy to understand that and to reach out and to try and help those that are so affected by it. At the same time, what opportunities in this moment can we seize to be better as people, to be better as a community? I talk about we're going to be wiser coming out of this. Think of how much we are going to understand our appreciation for being out and attending events and seeing people. And that energy is going to be ridiculous. And how do we hold on to that, the lessons we learn through this? So it doesn't mean you marginalize bad things. It means you acknowledge and then you move on and you shift your thinking to how can we tweak this to grow as a human and to build community.
I think the thing I love about that is that perspective of acknowledging the bad. This is what we're in right now, is something that hopefully is a once in a lifetime experience, and I look at my 4-year-old and I hope it's truly once in her lifetime. And a couple years from now, she's not even going to really remember that this happened. But the idea of, being able to look at something, address it for what it is, and then find the next step forward, I think is huge. The coach in me, we talk about this all the time, and it's, in a game when something bad happens, what's the next play? You can either dwell on that moment and 3 more minutes of the game has gone by and you've probably made 4 more mistakes, or it's accept it, what's next? Yeah. And with your experience, and people always talk about how, kids are so resilient. And, it's this resiliency that I see in my own children has been phenomenal. It's been inspiring. I'll be the first one to say it. My kids have helped get me through this challenging time. What are some of the qualities that in the student body, we'll say Wellington, but this applies to anybody with kids in that age. What are some of those qualities that either you have seen that gives you tremendous hope about what the new normal looks like as we move forward? Or, what are some of the qualities or things that parents can be talking about with their kids, at the dinner table? That isn't a lecture, but it's just hey, like, here's something to think on. That you see in your years of education that are going to help move the ball down the field as we come out of this and find our new normal, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I think that one of the key pieces we draw on a lot at Wellington is the idea of a growth mindset. I think my generation, you're much younger than me, so who knows what you've got. But our generation, I think, was told you're this, you're in this box, and these are the things that define you. I think we've gotten much better, and students are much better than we give them credit for, of having that growth mindset, a more open perspective on what's possible for them, and then being open to different perspectives and backgrounds. I think their understanding and their connection with diversity and really valuing what that means and seeing it in a very different way than some older individuals. So sometimes the educators bring their baggage from their experience, and then we think, well, the kids must have this. So I think it's that openness to connect and to grow and to learn. There is a deep interest in service in students now. We see it. They want to help and reach out. And so trying to find the tools for them as an outlet to do that. And we've seen that in the pandemic as well, where families are doing little things that then often driven by the students that say, we want to be able to elevate the community. So I think there's a lot of hope in that. I think we get worried about device use and the internet and the superficiality of doing things to engage and get affirmation rather than do them because you really care about it. So I think the more we can do to help students get a real depth of understanding of what real connection and real service and community looks and feels like, rather than this sort of ephemeral, quick, you got a like on something. But we had that, how did we waste time, whether it was new TV shows or, Nintendo. I did some serious damage on Mike Tyson Punch-Out, trying to move through that, hours. Now, I'll turn in, judge Fortnite. Okay, let's. Right. But those things are always going to be here. But is the school and our families taking time to help students engage in meaningful conversation where they can get a little bit more depth and ask that next question of either the why behind it or why that matters. And I think this is an opportunity to sometimes put devices away and have a conversation, play a game. I joke about Yahtzee being, let's bring back Yahtzee. But this is an opportunity to do that. And guess what the student's going to do right away is, no, I need that. Because their reward system has now been hacked by this device that the pings and likes and texts trigger that. So you need a little distance from it. And we're going to be together and we're going to do this. And then oftentimes on the back end, they say, well, that was nice, right?
Right.
Learn a thing. So it's that openness to be learners and to not be defined as a thing yet. I think we can leverage that to help students find their unique potential, find their purpose, and then launch them off to be ready for tomorrow's world, which is difficult to wrap our heads around.
Sure. When you talked about the notion that this generation of student that you're working with is very service driven, I think it's such an interesting juxtaposition to the social media world that is so easy for, I'll say, us old people to judge young people around that, we see that as existing, but someone that's in it every day like yourself will step back and speak about a generation that is service driven, which just is a lot of people would be surprised by, I think, in all honesty, just from the outside. And I think I think that's a piece that gives, because I see the same thing on Denison's campus. I see the same things with the students I work with there, that, when given the choice, service is something that they value. And sometimes it's on the adults to almost give permission to serve and to pursue that, and almost that just tell me what I can do to help kind of thing.
Yeah, sometimes Wellington gets, we ask, do you have a community service requirement, and credits for that? And I say, no, we don't. I think that devolves to boxes you have to check, that I need to put in my hours at X place. What we try to create is a culture of service, and to get beyond the let's raise money for, so any of the fundraisers do a presentation at morning meeting to help people understand why this matters. The funniest one is, it just came up in my mind a couple days ago, because I teach a marine biology class right now, and we were studying marine mammal protection and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and wanted them to understand how legislation works. And I was trying to find my old shirt from our students created a Save the Vaquita, which is a rare marine mammal over on the West Coast. And somehow it triggered in a couple of our students, and they led this resurgent understanding of this vaquita, this little porpoise, this marine mammal. They made shirts, they raised money, and they were all about it. So and having a space where students can do that, because then what they learned in trying to raise money or trying to raise awareness, it's really hard. And whether it's about a vaquita or a homeless issue or food scarcity in Columbus, all those things help the kids understand how to move a thing and how to get a group to understand a thing. Whether it's about raising money or just understanding, is really challenging. So you have to be thoughtful, you have to prepare. Again, skills that'll translate into a million different positive ways, but making sure students have the room to dig into those areas when they have that spark of interest, even if it's about a marine mammal from the West Coast. And it's great. I have a shirt. It's about saving the vaquita.
Well, it's that classic example of, of what's coming from that. Like, they'll remember the specific, but the lesson is far greater. Right. And I think your point about learning also that it's not easy to raise awareness, to raise money, to do, I've worked in development. Like it seems typically, I joke, typically you work in development at a place that you care about and you believe in what they're doing. So then you're naturally like, well, so does everybody else. Well, no, that's not how it is. And it reminds you of the grind and how hard it is to pursue what you are personally passionate about. But it's a skill set that, I've become a very big believer that this generation of students, we're going to see a huge resurgence in philanthropy and service over the next 10 to 20 years. And it's exciting for, it's exciting for me to have young kids that are growing up in that environment. I think is awesome. But, as I shift kind of to the last question that I ask everyone, but you're a unique person to ask this to because of the conversation we've been having. I'm a coach by trade, I'm a coach. That's what I am. And so my kids, I think, roll their eyes plenty when I tell them to be a good teammate. That their family is the team they're on, and it's the most important team that I help coach. But I think it speaks to so much in society, and we've seen in these recent months, like, we are all on the same team right now. And it's taken everybody's collective efforts to help us get through this. When you step back and look at the team you have at Wellington, and as we talked about earlier, that team is parents and kids and faculty and staff and alums and trustees. You got a lot of different, players on that team. When you step back and look at that and process just how well you all have done, through this, but also how excited you are for how you'll come out of this, how do you finish the sentence based on what you've experienced? To be a good teammate is to.
use your gifts to make those around you better. I think it gets down to having an understanding that there isn't a scarcity model. Someone gets something, that doesn't mean I get less. It's a model of abundance. And if I can do things that position that person next to me to have more success or to elevate their game, that's where my mindset should be, because then they will have that same mindset for me. So now they can provide perspective and support for me, so that my game gets better. So actually, by allowing them to excel, that's going to hopefully help me improve as well. And I think that's a critical idea for students, that it isn't about scarcity. It's we can use our gifts. We talk about asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength, because we all have something we can offer each other. And why wouldn't we be drawing on that all the time? Now that requires trust, as we brought up earlier, parents to trust the school that we're on the same page to elevate the opportunities for their student. But I think you've got to have that interest to support the others. You know, I'm begrudgingly watching the Jordan documentary. I'm a Piston bad boy guy, so they got beat up in the last couple episodes. But what I've liked about that for the narrative is that moment on the Bulls where Jordan shifted from, and the coaches too, because Doug Collins was kind of that, Jordan, do it, give it to Michael. Where then he started to identify that his gifts can actually elevate the pieces around him, and those pieces around him are extremely valuable. Who'd have thought John Paxson was so valuable? But by positioning and using him to then bring up the others, I think that's a really strong narrative. And teachers allowing student voice, because that student voice can then elevate the experience in the classroom. It's not a one way. So I think that ability to all commit to elevate each other. It's not climb over somebody else to get to the top. It's sort of all boats rise together, to bring it back to marine biology.
Perfect. No, I think you're exactly right. And that concept of scarcity versus abundance, I think, is something that is, I run the leadership council for our lacrosse program at Denison, and that's a phrase like that. That phrase isn't one we've used, but will be moving forward. And we talk about it all the time, with the idea that, within a highly competitive athletics program at the college level, while you're competing as a team, you're also competing for playing time and spots. And so there's internal competition, which is hard. It's no different than
scarcity of minutes.
Yeah. I mean, it's, if you're, listening to this and you're in a big business and there's a huge org chart, there's a scarcity of slots that you can move up, and each slot carries, more perks and money. I mean, all these pieces that, again, societally we're taught this kind of, step on the next guy to get up. And it's funny that you brought up the Last Dance documentary, because in watching it, a good friend of mine, posted online, and I was really proud of him because he's not a Bulls guy. But he said,
who is?
Yeah, he said, he goes, I hate the fact that Michael Jordan is the guy that has taught me the value of bringing everyone else along.
Yeah.
Because when you were watching it live, I grew up with Jordan, and it was always Jordan. But to see this behind the scenes, and the fact that they didn't become great until he allowed everybody else to be great, knowing that it wasn't going to take, to your point, it wasn't going to take away his greatness. Like, it wasn't like he was giving up, going from 100% greatness to 75. He was staying at 100 and just bringing everybody else up. It's a really cool thing. And again, it's a generational thing that for kids watching this now, it's such a cool thing for a parent to be able to watch that and say, look, this is what we're talking about. It's relatable. It's Michael Jordan.
The other moment I had educationally was the Rodman narrative, where Bill Jackson understood you got to give him room. He's got these gifts and talents, but you've got to give him room. And that part hit me really on the educational side, because how many of those kids do we try and like settle down, like get over here and fit into this thing where if we can give them room, still within the bound, we're still a school, we need to be functional. But if you can identify where that energy is, give them room to dig into it, that's when the magic happens. And I would never hold up Rodman as the be all end all of, what we all want to inspire. I love him, love the worm. But the idea of recognizing that, giving room with guidance, creating a structure that really works for that person or student for us, what's possible is remarkable. And that's also that unflappable optimism. Who would have, you might not look at that and say, whoa, he's going to be a contributor on all these championships. No, he's a key piece if you can sort of provide that structure. And that's, I think, at the core of what Wellington's trying to do as well.
Yeah, I think connecting those dots is an awesome perspective that you bring right there. Cause when I watch it, I'm a huge Phil Jackson fan. I don't know that I could ever take his approach in coaching, because I think to be like that, it has to be truly your core.
Right.
But I think that there are so many leadership lessons coming out of this documentary that it's incredible. Between what we talked about with Jordan, with a guy like Scottie Pippen being willing to be the second guy because he wanted to win. He wanted to find
that terrible contract maybe facilitated a lot of what they could do then.
Sure. And, and Phil Jackson's understanding of his personnel, and that Scottie Pippen, needed to be able to show his power and have that confidence built by sitting out. And, and knowing that he was willing to give up short-term success for the long-term success. No, it's fascinating. I love it. I obviously I can't thank you enough for taking the time. It's Wellington's, clearly a place that means the world to me. But as I've gotten older and kind of removed, I see Wellington from a different perspective now. And to watch what has happened just in the last couple of months under your leadership in terribly challenging times. I think crisis brings out the true personality of leaders. And I want to just say thank you for what you're doing and what your team is doing. I know that it certainly takes a village there, but I want to thank you on a macro level for just what you're doing to help lead Wellington through this and into the new normal, but also just for sharing the thoughts and insights today. It's awesome. And selfishly, I love getting the chance to pick the brains of people that I have, leaders that I have the utmost respect for. So thank you very much.
I so appreciate that. And coming from you, someone who knows the school inside and out, and early on knowing what the vision of the founders were to build a place that's really meaningful for kids and families. So that means the world to me, and it has been hard, but we have an amazing team, and that's built around this community that's supportive. I feel room to make decisions and to bring in voices to help us be better. It's really hard, but a really important time for us to reset and understand what matters most. I love this conversation. I appreciate it. I could do this all day. And I appreciate you bringing these ideas out. Really important. I picture your kids constantly, whenever they misbehave, you say, be a good teammate. So now I just have that vision, which I appreciate. But this has been fun. Love Wellington. Love what it stands for, and want to do my best to help it to continue to grow and serve students so that they can go shape the world as we want them to.
Well, you're doing it at an elite level, and they're definitely lucky to have you. So as we move forward, stay safe, wash those hands and keep doing what you're doing. Cause I'll be honest, like the optimistic messaging that Wellington is sharing, there's a lot more people it's impacting than you'll ever know. And I think that's the sign of true leadership and true impact is you never really appreciate just how far it goes.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate the thoughts and the time.
Well, that's a wrap for episode 5 of the Family on 3 podcast. It was awesome to have Dr. Terwin join us today, and I can't tell you how thankful I am for his time and also his service at my alma mater, the Wellington School. It's clear that they're obviously in great hands, and hopefully you were able to pull some insight from this conversation that could pertain to your own life, be it as a parent, be it as a leader, or just be it as a member of your community. The goal with this podcast and these conversations are to bring to light some awesome ideas from some awesome people, and hopefully you were able to find that today. For me, the biggest takeaway was simply that by serving others, we're actually serving ourselves. And in these challenging times right now in the spring of 2020, that's more prevalent than ever. So stay strong, stay safe, and we'll see you on episode 6.